Hello everyone and welcome back to the finals of the AirThings Masters. This is the second match and the players are the same. It's Yanni Pomici versus Magnus Carlsen. Yesterday was the first match, ended in a draw. All four games were drawn after a day of incredibly fighting chess, and now we are starting off with the first game of the second match. It's again really an incredible game. Some chances were missed, but you guys are here to rectify that. So let's check it out. Nepo with the white pieces opens with e4. C5 by Magnus, going for the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, we have knight to c6, and again bishop to b5, going for the Nishmedinov Rossolimo attack. We have g6, Magnus goes for his fianchetto variation, and now castles. Bishop to g7, we have d3 and d6, so nothing new for the moment. And now the early e5. This is perfectly fine. The knight on c6 is pinned, so d captures on e5, we have bishop captures on c6 with check, b captures, and now rook to e1, putting pressure on the e5 pawn, queen to c7 defending, and now knight to a3. So you can see it's a very nice setup as the c pawn is now doubled. There is no b pawn, so once this knight comes to c4, there is no b pawn or d pawn to kick it away from c4. It will be an excellent square for this knight. So knight f6, knight captures on e5, grabbing back the pawn, and now knight to d5, opening up an attack on the knight here. So knight a to c4, now nicely defending the knight on e5. So now you have two excellently placed knights, and here Magnus just castles, and there are the position has been reached before, but the move Nepo plays, the h3 move, is a new one. So already as of move 12, we have a completely new game. So here after h3, we have bishop to a6, putting pressure on the knight here. So Magnus might have some ideas of capturing and doubling up Nepo's c pawns as well, but that also means giving up the bishop pair. So here queen e2, Nepo says, all right, you can capture here, but that would actually be very bad, because if bishop captures, we're going to capture with the pawn, challenge the knight here, and once the knight moves, we're going to play bishop to f4, and this is just a beautiful, beautiful position for white, threatening all sorts of nasty discoveries. Once the queen moves, rook a to d1, white completed development and just has a spectacular position. So instead Magnus plays f6. For the moment it seems a bit weakening, but you are getting rid of the knight from this beautiful square, and then you will advance this pawn to e5. So knight back to f3, we have e5, and now bishop to e3. Continuing development and offering the bishop for a knight, which Magnus happily accepts. Knight captures on e3, and now queen captures on e3. Still not worried about this capture. Obviously, Nepo had this position already somewhere, and he knows that it is good for him, even though it's the best move recommended by the engine, but Magnus agrees with Nepo. So rook f to e8, just continuing development. Now knight f to d2, and now Nepo wants to play knight to b3 and put pressure on this c5 pawn, and Magnus will have to trade on c4. So queen to e7, adding a defender to the c5 pawn, and now knight to b3. Here Nepo continues with his plan of going after the c5 pawn, when maybe rook to e2 followed by rook a to e1, putting pressure along this e file could be maybe a better way to go. But okay, it's a rapid game. Knight to b3, and now Magnus trades on c4, doubles up Nepo's pawns, captures, and now bishop to f8. We have to keep an eye on this pawn here, and now it looks a bit clunky for black, but Magnus is preparing f5 e4, and there's not much Nepo can do about this. So rook 8 to d1, grabbing the open d file, and Magnus advances the pawn to f5. There's no need to rush with rook 8 to d8, as there are no squares that this rook can go to, so white cannot infiltrate here. Rook to d2, Nepo prepares to double up on the d file, and now rook a to d8. We have rook e to d1, and Magnus advances the pawn to e4. And now if you could advance those pawns a little bit further, it will be extremely dangerous for white. And it's interesting, there's this very cool line: rook captures, rook captures, rook captures, queen captures, and now knight captures on c5. Of course you can win a pawn here, but you can also blunder the game here, because now just queen d1 check, king h2, and you bring the queen back to d6 with check, and there goes the knight. So instead, after e4, we have c3, and now Magnus trades. Rook captures on d2, queen captures on d2, and now queen to e5, grabbing more space, centralizing the queen. This always feels great when you can do that. Sometimes when you don't know what to play and you have an option to centralize your queen, more often than not, it is the strongest move to be made. So here, queen e5, and now knight to a5, going after the undefended c6 pawn. So Magnus defends it, rook to e6. It's also a very nice active move with the rook, not only defending, but also preparing rook d6 in some lines. So here, g3 by Nepo, and now Magnus went into a deep thing. Some 4 minutes were spent here on this move because there's quite a lot to consider. How do you put more pressure on White's position here? Because you can feel that Black is better here, but how do you do it? One way to do it is to try and sacrifice the g5 pawn. But let's see what happens. Queen captures on g5. We're gonna play rook g6 and now put insane pressure here on the g3 pawn. f4 is coming next. The problem is there's knight captures on c6, attacking our queen. And after queen to c7, we can even play queen captures on f5 and give up the knight. And after queen captures, with something like rook to d8, and this will be, well, it will be very hard for Black to get out of this. Of course, White is not winning or anything. It's an equal position, but quite an exotic one. For example, rook f6, queen g5 check. We can go rook back, queen f5, and so on. Another thing after g3, there's the very interesting h5. And now, what do you do here? Well, of course, we want to continue pushing. So let's say queen g5. Now comes bishop e7, kicks away the queen, queen f4, and now we could see a trade here, or Magnus could maybe put the queen somewhere else, but probably a trade, captures, and now bishop to d6. And once everything gets traded off, for example, knight captures on c6, bishop captures f4, knight captures on a7, rook a6, going after the a2 pawn, knight will move somewhere, rook captures on a2, we would get this endgame where Black is much better, as there is play on both sides of the board. It's a bishop against a knight, plus a lot of these pawns are very weak. So these are the options, but Magnus goes for a third one, so not g5 right away, not h5. He goes for rook to d6. He wants to force the queen away from the d file and then, well, trade off the remaining rook. So here we have queen to e2, rook captures on d1 with check, queen captures, and now e3. That's the idea. So what can Nepo do to defend this? He plays queen to e2, which is definitely the way to go. Now if Magnus trades here, just king captures, and there's no really a fun active move for Black. There's not all that much here in the position. So instead, Magnus brings the bishop in, bishop to h6, and now Nepo very quickly just plays knight to b3. There is time for this as, well, Black does not have all that many threats. So here, Magnus plays f4, continues pushing, and now g captures on f4. Bishop captures, f captures on e3, bishop captures, and king to g2. So Magnus was able to bust open Nepo's defenses. Now, how can he continue? Well, he starts by improving the position of his king, putting it to a little bit of a safer square. So king g7. Now comes queen f3. Now we will put pressure on this c6 pawn and hope that Black can't do really anything to the white king. Bishop to g5. Now Magnus wants to infiltrate with the bishop this way. Knight to a5, going after the c6 pawn, and now bishop to h4. So here, cutting off a lot of squares away from the white king. Knight captures on c6, attacking the queen here, grabbing the pawn, and now queen to g5 with check, going after that d2 square. Another way to do it would be just queen d6, put pressure on the knight, and also go for the d2 square. So here we have king to h2. A safer thing would be something like queen g4, and after queen to d2 check, king f3. But who does this? It's incredibly weird to play like this. So instead, after queen g5, we have king to h2, and now queen to d2 with check, queen to g2, and now queen f4 check. So now, will we see a repetition? Well, king h1 was played, queen to c1 check, king to h2, and queen to f4 with check. And now, after king to h1, there is a move that allows Magnus to win this game, but it's incredibly difficult to find. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find this possibly missed chance while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this incredible idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is not queen anywhere else. It's queen to e3. That's the move you have to find, and this is well. This is now game over for white. And the problem is, what can white do? Well, you can't really move the queen all that much, and you can't deliver any checks to the black king. So what you can do is play something like a4 or knight captures on a7. Both moves are very useful for white. Now we play h5. And again, what can white do? White will go back. Now we play bishop to g5. We want to put the bishop on f4 and take away the h2 square from the king. And once white starts pushing a4 or b4, doesn't really matter. White's moves are pretty much well, whatever white plays, black's moves will be the same. So here, bishop f4, a5, we're gonna play queen to e1 with check. And now after queen g1, we're gonna play queen to e2. And now, well, there are two options here, really. You could start advancing the pawn, but if you advance the pawn, then bishop to e3 attacks the queen, and now, well, that's just it, pretty much. You either give up the back rank, or you give up the control of this diagonal. So what can you do here? Queen to g2, just queen e1 check, king h2, and the bishop to f4 check. That's the plan. No more squares for the black king. You have to give up the queen, and then you get checkmated. And another thing, instead of this a6 move, if we don't play that, we could play queen to g2 right away, but again, it doesn't help. Queen to d3 first, and now after white makes any move, now we play bishop to e3. This is also a very nice pattern that well, can come in very handy if you know it by heart. And after, let's say, a7, queen to d1 check, king to h2, and now bishop to f4 check. Everything is cut off from the black king. You have to play queen g3, and now we go in with our own queen, queen d2 check, king h1, and bishop captures on g3, and of course you get mated on the next move. So this is what's happening. But of course, Magnus has a minute on the clock, and there is no time to spot queen e3 or calculate it. He plays a6, takes care of his pawn, and it makes sense. If you're not sure about queen e3, or if you're not thinking about it, then you are of course afraid of knight captures on a7. Those pawns are gonna start marching forward. So here we have queen to e2. Now trying to get into the position, but okay, for the moment you don't have queen e7 and you don't have queen e5. Okay, you can play queen e5 and trade queens, but Magnus first plays queen c1 check, king h2, queen f4 check, king to h1, and queen to c1 check. And here, of course, after king h2 and queen f4, we have king to h1, and it was in this position on move 46 that the players agreed to a draw, or rather it was a draw by threefold repetition. So yeah, really incredible start to day two. Much like yesterday, there was a lot of action. Some chances were missed, but in the end, the game again ends in a draw. So next game, Magnus will have the white pieces, and we'll see what will happen then. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Really a wild one. I would like to thank CypherKicks, Leo Joel Bourne, James O'Toole, John Cousins, and Nikita Nicholas for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the rest of the match until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.